Allison. But thank you all so much for joining us for best-selling author Allison Brennan, who's here tonight to discuss her new thriller, See How They Hide, in this installment of Author Hour in Massachusetts. So Allison Brennan is the New York Times best-selling and award-winning author of more than 45 thrillers and numerous short stories. She was nominated for Best Paperback Original Thriller by International Thriller Writers, had multiple nominations and 2 Daphne Awards, and is a 5-time RITA finalist for Best Romantic Suspense. Allison believes life is too short to be bored, so she had 5 kids and she writes 3 books a year. Originally from Northern California, she and her husband have relocated to Arizona, where they enjoy baseball spring training, hiking, and spending time with their kids, their grandchildren, and assorted pets. So everyone, let's please give a big virtual round of applause to Allison for joining us here tonight. And Allison, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robert, so much for having me, and thank you to the library for hosting this. This is a wonderful event. I apologize for my brightness. In my blinds, I closed them, but the sun goes down on that side here in Arizona, and at this time of day is it seems a little bright to me. But anyway, I love talking about writing, and I love obviously talking about books and reading. And I made a list of the 3 questions that I get the most from readers. So I thought I would just give you kind of a presentation on the 3 questions that I'm asked the most. The first one is, how did I start writing? Okay, so 19 years ago, I published my first book. It came out at the end of December of 2005. So it was technically a January 2006 book. And that was The Prey. But before that, I had always been a writer. And I think that if you talk to any author, they will say that they started as a reader and then they just started writing because they loved books so much. That was me. But I got married, I had kids, and I had no time. So I wasn't reading much, I wasn't writing much. When my son, my third, when I call him Brennan number 3, he's now 23 years old. He was born in May of 2001, and I was on maternity leave. I had all these books I had put on my bookshelf. My mom said, "Oh, Allison, you got to read this, you got to read that." So I just started going through them while I was on maternity leave, and I read 2 books that really resonated with me. One was Lisa Gardner's The Third Victim, and the other was Iris Johansson's The Search. That's when I said, those are the kinds of books I want to read, or that I want to write. I loved them so much. But I had 3 kids and I didn't have time. I had a career. I was working full time outside the house. I didn't want to go back to work after my son was born, but we had a mortgage, and as everybody understands, you have to feed your kids and pay for the house and utilities and all of that. So reluctantly, I went back to work, but I really wanted to start writing. So what I did is I gave up television for 3 years. And people who know me know that that was a big sacrifice. I love TV. I love, I was, CSI, Lost. At the time, I was watching Deadwood. There's so many great television shows out there. But I gave it up. I gave up TV for 3 years and wrote every night from 9 until midnight because my kids went to bed between 8 and 8:30, and I had to be up at 6 in the morning to go to work. So that was the only time I could find to write. I wrote 5 books in 2 years and sold my 5th book 2 years after I started seriously writing. And I actually sold my book when I was pregnant with Brennan number 5, who is now 20 years old. So that was really how I got started. And a lot of aspiring writers will say, well, I don't know how to make the time, or I have a job, or I have elderly parents I have to take care of, or I have young kids. There's a lot of very legitimate reasons why you might feel you don't have the time to write. But I would argue that if it's important to you, make the time. If it's one day a week that you tell your family, okay, I'm spending this 6 hours Sunday afternoon writing a book, get your own dinner, then that's what you're going to have to do. If you could do like I did and write after the kids go to bed, giving up a little bit of things you love like television and a little bit of sleep, then that's what you have to do. But if you really want to write, you need to find the time and start writing. So that's how I got started. And I wrote my first 12 books were romantic suspense. And by romantic suspense, I mean stories where there's a hero and a heroine and a mystery that needs to be solved. And they usually work together to solve the mystery and then find love in the process. That's the traditional formula for a romantic suspense. My romantic suspense were a little bit darker because, again, I love Lisa Gardner and she tends to write a little on the dark side. Um, so I really, really enjoyed writing them, but I also wanted to write, I don't want to call them bigger books because I don't want to diminish what I was writing before. I think my romantic suspense definitely have a place and I think they're good stories. But I wanted to kind of get beyond the romance part and focus more on the crime, human nature, how crimes are solved. I've always loved police procedurals. You can see my bookshelves behind me. I have a lot of true crime, a lot of research books, and I just devour that stuff. In fact, when I was 13, the first true crime book I ever read was In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. Probably not appropriate for a 13-year-old, but I was absolutely floored by that book. I loved it. Um, and that's kind of what started my love affair with true crime. So I would say that once I wrote the romantic suspense and I really kind of wanted to write something a little bit different, I had to create a kind of a bridge to what I was thinking about writing and my romantic suspense. And that's when I came up with the Lucy Kincaid series. Lucy Kincaid is a 17-book series with 6 novellas, and a novella is basically just a short book. It's like 30 to 40,000 words, but it tells a complete story. And Lucy, the reason why I kind of call her the bridge series is that she did have a relationship with her boyfriend turned husband, who was a private investigator, but it occurred over the course of the series. So it wasn't like every single book focused on their relationship. Each book focused on a crime, of which their relationship was a secondary plot point. And that segued until I was able to launch a mystery series, the Maxine Revere series, which is not romantic suspense. It's really about Max's journey. She was an investigative reporter who investigated cold cases. And I have 5 books in that series. Once Max was done, I wrote The Third to Die. And it's the first book in the Quinn and Costa series, of which the 6th book was just published, See How They Hide. Quinn and Costa is a lot of fun to write. I'll tell you how I kind of came up. This is actually the second most common asked question that I get from readers is where do I get my ideas? So this is a classic example of how I get my ideas. I was doing research through the Sacramento FBI office, and I went through their FBI Citizens Academy. Through the Citizens Academy, I got to meet like everybody that worked in the Sacramento FBI, including the head of what's called the evidence response team. Most FBI offices have an evidence response team, and what they do is they train their agents, certain agents, to become an expert in one thing. And then when you have a complex crime, you bring in this group of agents that then work together to solve this crime. The story that I had been told when I was at the academy was the Yosemite murders. If anybody remembers Carrie Stainer and the Yosemite murders, where he killed a mom, her daughter, and her daughter's friend, who was, I believe, a foreign exchange student, and killed them, but left their bodies in a different location. It was a very, very complex case, and the evidence response team investigated it with both evidence in Yosemite and then at different parts in Northern California as he was traveling with his victims. So it was fascinating to listen to how they put that all together. And I said, I would love to write a series about the evidence response team, but I don't want to keep it in just one location. I think I want them to move around and to do something different. So I came up with the mobile response team. And the mobile response team is the best of the best in the FBI. They each have a specialty and they travel to rural and remote areas around the country to solve complex crimes that local law enforcement can't handle, or they don't have the local FBI resources to be able to handle it. So I uh, came up, the first book was about a serial killer who kills three people 3 days apart every 3 years. So the third to die. And I didn't, one of the things about, I don't plot. So I didn't really even know what his reasoning was. And when it all came clear to me in the book, I actually got really excited. So that was the first book. It takes place in Liberty Lake, Washington, which is a tiny town outside of Spokane. It's a real town. I think it has about 7,500 residents. Um, Spokane is also a small town. They do have an FBI resident agency that answers to the Seattle office, but they have very few people that are actually working in there, which was a perfect reason why my team went there. So as I developed the series, they went to different areas and they tackle kind of different crimes. The second book was set in Patagonia, Arizona. That's a town of 1,000 people. It's an old mining town, and the case there was centered around a potential environmental disaster related to a refinery that was refining copper, which is copper is a uh, uh, major metal that's mined in Arizona. So there's a lot of copper mines. And the third book, I sent them up to San Juan Islands in Washington to solve an explosion. A boat exploded, and one of the victims was a retired FBI agent who was looking into a cold case. So they had to figure out who was targeted on the boat, who was the target. It was a charter boat. Was it the FBI agent or was it somebody else? And then who had motive to kill these people and the skill to blow up the boat. So that was actually kind of fun. And I'd actually planned to visit the San Juan Islands when I came up with this idea because I've always wanted to go there. Unfortunately, that's when COVID hit. So I had to rely completely on the San Juan Islands tourist website for all of the information that I got to put in that book, as well as Google Earth. I explored the island virtually on my computer. I much would have preferred to have gone there to explore it, but I had to make do with what I had because I wrote that book in 2020. And then the fourth book, Seven Girls Gone, takes place in the Bayou. I actually created a fictional town because there was a lot of corruption in the town. But for those people who are as fascinated with true crime as I am, that book is very loosely related to the Jeff Davis 8 about unsolved murders of 8 prostitutes in Jennings, Louisiana. So I had been fascinated with that story and I kind of wanted to solve it. I've read a lot about it, but obviously I don't write true crime. So I kind of made up my own story and I did have dead prostitutes, but I did solve my crime. One of the reasons that book is one of my favorites is because I got to bring in an alligator, and I always have fun when I get to do something a little bit different in my book. So I had an alligator in that book. Um, they're actually kind of terrifying when I was watching all the videos about what they're capable of, because I do a lot of research. And then my fifth book does take place in Los Angeles, which is not a small town, The Missing Witness, but it kind of brings Kara, who one of my main characters, she's an LAPD detective, kinds of brings her full circle, and so she can resolve some of her overarching mysteries. And then that brings me to See How They Hide. So the mobile response team is made up of, uh, I think there's 8 of them now. There wasn't 8 when they started. Matt Costa is the head of the team. Michael Harris is former Navy SEAL, and he is a munitions expert. as well as a tactical expert. So he's the one that Matt relies on for any sort of tactical situations. If they have to breach a building, if they have to deal with anything that's potentially dangerous, Michael's the one that's in charge of that. Dr. Catherine Jones is the forensic psychiatrist who works out of DC and gives advice on basically the criminal minds person who kind of gives advice about the psychology of the potential victims and the potential suspects. There is, and then LAPD Detective Kara Quinn, who starts the series on leave from LAPD and is assigned to the FBI, who now in See How They Hide is a permanent liaison from LAPD. I got to kind of stretch a little bit on that one, but I I used to work in government, and government can pretty much do whatever they want if they just find a way to do it. So LAPD pays her, but she's assigned to the FBI and she's working for the team. I also have Ryder Kim, who's the essentially the jack of all trades. He handles all the logistics. He is an analyst, not a sworn agent. I have an agent who specializes in white collar crimes and handles all the financial and banking stuff, which I know nothing about. So Zach is not on the page very much. I just basically, he reveals what our characters need to know to go on with the case. And then a new character. Oh, no, I forgot. Oh, Dr. Jim Esteban, who is their crime scene specialist. He's older, he's 50, he's almost kind of the Columbo vibe, going very smart, very down to earth. Um, he joined the team, and then there is a new agent, Sloan Wagner, who's a rookie, a former Marine, and she has now been added to the team for an investigator. So the team is finally put together in See How They Hide, and I have all of them working um, to solve the crimes. Now, people ask where I get my ideas, and I kind of explained how I got the ideas for this series. But the idea for this book came from a what if. What if two people were killed on opposite coasts in the same way on the same day? I had one victim in Virginia and one victim in Oregon, in Ashland, Oregon, a small college town. One of my kids went to Southern Oregon University. So I know the area well. So I had to split my team so that because they had to investigate these two crimes. And that was a lot of fun because I got to figure out how each crime was going to contribute to the resolution. They all ended up meeting in Colorado. When I wrote the book, I knew the overarching story that these people were killed by the same group of people. I didn't really know why. I didn't know exactly who the killer was. And that is for me the fun part of writing. I want to kind of solve the crime along with my protagonist. In the course of writing See How They Hide, I created another character, Riley Pierce. She's only in this book, but she's the one that once I introduced her, she knew a lot of the details that my characters needed to know. And she is starting to investigate these murders on her own. And eventually, her investigation is going to um, merge with my law enforcement investigation, and we will, of course, solve the crime. I do write crime fiction. I do want the crime to be solved by the end of the book. I'm not going to leave you hanging ever with like a cliffhanger that you have to read the next book to find out. My any cliffhangers are going to be related to interpersonal relationships or the growth of the team, or where you don't know if a character is going to come back in another book, but the mystery is going to be solved because I don't like to leave people in a lurch. Um, the other question, so the how do I start writing? That's always the big one. Oh, I should say one of the other questions I get is, when do I find the time to write? And I will say I write every day. I treat this as a job. I used to work in the California State Legislature. I worked there for 13 years. I commuted. Nobody ever asked me, "Oh my gosh, how do you get up in the morning and go to work when you have 5 kids?" And I'm going, nobody ever asked me that. They just expect you to get up, put your kids in school, and go to work. Um, but when I write, I say, yeah, I write 3 books a year. Oh my gosh, how do you find the time to write? I treat it as a job. And when the kids were really little, I had to juggle a lot more. But once they all started school, they go to school, and that was my writing time. I had to be very, very disciplined. They're in school, I write. I didn't volunteer at the school. I didn't go and field trips and do things like that because I needed to write while they were there. But because I was a writer, my time was flexible. So after school, I could go to sporting events, or I could do weekend soccer games, and then maybe write in Saturday afternoons after the game. I had a lot of flexibility, but I did treat it as a job, and I treat it as a job now. Sometimes I actually wish the kids were still at home, because I think I would procrastinate less and write when they were at school, knowing that, okay, they're all going to be home at 3:30, so I'd better get writing. But now, my time is my own, and because all my youngest is 20, and I have to make sure I'm disciplined to get my work done. So other than that, my other question that I always get is, how do I research my books? And I love research. It's one of the most fun things that I do. I call my research trips my field trips, writing field trips. I have been to the morgue to witness an autopsy. Like I mentioned before, I did the FBI Citizens Academy. But as part of the Citizens Academy, because I had to go through a background check and get approved for it, I was able to participate in FBI SWAT training. So once a year at McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento, they would do a major SWAT training with all of the SWAT teams in Northern California. And I got to participate. I've been a victim. I have been a bad guy. I have been a hostage. And I have learned so much through those exercises, because not just by participating in the exercises, but afterwards, whoever is running them will debrief the team. And I can listen to them why they did certain things, like why they checked in one place or didn't check in another place, why they breached one room but didn't see another room, why they frisked these people, why they put them in handcuffs. It was just very, very interesting. And then I could hear their thought processes. Also, how they handle, say, active shooter situations, how they handle a major medical issue, such as if you had a shooting or if you had a hostage situation. I did one scenario where the entire drill was a plane crash. So I was a victim in a plane crash, and how they go in and handle that situation. I learned so much through those trainings. I probably did about 8 of them before I left Sacramento. Um, I've also been to the FBI Academy. I've gone on ride-alongs with local law enforcement. Um, those are always fun because you get fun stories. I also happen to have my sister-in-law is a trauma nurse, and she has helped me because one of the complaints in my earlier books was that my medical information was inaccurate. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, if that makes any sense. I think I know everything. It's like, oh, well, this is logical and this is what the dosage would be or whatever. And I overwrite and I get it all wrong. So I have learned over the course of See How They Hide is my 46th book. So out of the course of 46 books, I have learned that if I'm in doubt, I need to ask somebody who is an expert. So my sister-in-law is a former trauma nurse who now trains nurses. I have a cousin who works in the emergency room in Alaska. And I have a good friend of mine who's also a writer, DP Lyle. He writes his own mysteries, who is a retired doctor, and he helps with a lot of the medical stuff. So I reach out now to people because I don't want to get things wrong. I got a military thing wrong in one of my very first books. So now I have a couple military people I reach out to, one in the Marines and one in the Army, so that because I don't want to get these things wrong. I don't want to get the details wrong that I can get right. And I think that's just really important for authors. I write fiction. I recognize that there's a lot of suspension of disbelief in fiction, but I don't want to get the easy stuff wrong if I can at all avoid it. Um, One of the nice things is my oldest daughter is now a Phoenix PD officer, so I can tap into her or her friends to gain other information and insight in law enforcement. Uh, I think as a writer, the most important thing to me is to tell a good story. I don't need to, be 100% accurate in everything as long as I can entertain my readers, because I recognize that readers are giving me one of the most valuable things that they have, which is their time. And because I value your time and I value the time of everybody who reads my books, I want to tell a story that when you get to the end, you're going to go, oh, that was a good use of my time. I enjoyed it. That is my number one goal. That is really all I care about, is that people, when they're done reading my books, they're going to say that was a good use of their time. Um, so to that end, I research a lot, but I try not to let it show on the page. You don't need to have 3 pages about police procedure, about why they do this or why do they do that, because to me, that's boring. It's like, you don't want to see cops doing paperwork. They don't even want to see themselves doing paperwork. My daughter will often say that, at her end of her shift, she has to pull over and just in the parking lot type up all of her reports because she had no time to write them in the course of the day. You don't want to watch that. I don't want to watch that. But I do like to touch upon those authentic details in my books. I do have another series I didn't mention. It's the Angel Heart Investigation series, which is about private investigators. So I go away from the law enforcement, what I call my law enforcement roots, because I love writing about police procedurals, whether they're FBI agents or law enforcement in any way. I have a former US Marshal in one series. I have local cops, and I have FBI agents. But sometimes you don't want to write with law enforcement because you want to tackle crimes or situations that law enforcement is not the best person to handle. And that's why I started writing a private investigation series. Um, the Angel Heart family, it's set here in Phoenix, Arizona. They work together to help people who really can't go to law enforcement for help. So, for example, an abused spouse whose spouse is a cop. She isn't gonna trust law enforcement, so she hires Angel Heart Investigations. Um, the second book is about how the police closed a case about an overdose death, and the mother wants more answers, so she hires Angel Heart Investigations because the police weren't able to give her the answers that she needed. I think for me as a writer, I always want to be fresh, because if I'm interested in my stories, my readers will be interested. And therefore, I wanted to tackle some kinds of different questions. And it keeps my creative juices kind of flowing. So I could write a police procedural, and then I could write the PI book, and then I'll write a standalone. I have actually a romantic mystery coming out in June called Beach Reads and Deadly Deeds. Completely different than what I've been writing, and I hope everybody loves it because it is still a mystery, but it's a little lighter, I guess would be a better way of saying it. So those are the questions I get for readers. If you have a different question, I would love to hear it. If not, I can talk about anything. I can, but if you have questions, please type them into the bar, and I would be happy to answer anything.
Allison, first audience question goes to Vicky, and you did touch on this a little bit. What does your daily writing schedule look like?
So in the past, like I had said, when my kids were in school, I wrote every day when they left for school until they got home. But I got in this really bad habit. My husband would take them to school, and then he would bring me back Starbucks every single day, which was very, very nice. And so he would bring me back Starbucks, and I didn't feel like I could actually start writing until he came back. So if he met friends like for coffee after school, like a lot of the dads that were football coaches and stuff, they would get together and have coffee. I might not get my Starbucks until 10, but I had this little mental thing that said, "Oh, I haven't had my Starbucks. I can't start writing." Um, Now that I'm here in Arizona and my kids are all self-sufficient, and I only have my two youngest that still live at home. Uh, I I get up early every morning because I'm in Arizona. I started walking in the morning because in the summers, obviously, it gets really, really hot. So I'll walk in the morning, then I'll have my coffee, and I'm usually sitting at the computer writing by 7 in the morning. I didn't used to be able to be a morning writer, but now I am. So my best writing time now is 7 to noon, whereas in the past it was probably, you know, 11 to 3 was when I was my core writing time. Now it's about 7 to noon. And then if I have a deadline, well, actually, I write probably until 4 every single day, but I do a lot more in the morning. I get a lot more done. And then if I have a deadline, I will sometimes sit at night and, work on projects. But that's essentially, I write 6 days a week. The only day I don't write is Mondays because I babysit my grandson. He's 18 months old. And so I get to spend the whole day with him.
Allison, as a follow-up question, I imagine you're writing one book at a time, and you said that you publish 3 books per year. So I imagine you are writing 3 books per year. And so, do you take time off in between the books? How often does it? How long does it take for you to write a book?
I don't take time off. Except at Christmas. I'll take usually about 10 days off at Christmas. That's kind of my vacation, but it's usually because I have to do Christmas shopping and I have my kids that live out of the area come in. And so, there's a lot of stuff to do. I do write one book at a time, but what I'll do is I'll like write a book, I'll turn it into my editor. And usually at that point, I'll either start the next book or I'll be doing revisions on another book. So I create, I guess I call it creating a book, one book at a time. But sometimes I have to put that book aside because I'll have copy edits and they have to be done within 10 days. So I put a book aside and I do my copy edits and then I go back to the book I was writing. All told, it's about between 3 and 4 months it takes me to write a book. That's about my sweet spot.
So, Vicky asks, do you ever plan to revisit Max Revere or Lucy Kincaid?
I get these questions all the time. Max, probably not. Um, my publisher at the time did felt felt that the Lucy Kincaid series sold better, so Max got 5 books. I was able to kind of complete her story arc. To a way I was satisfied with her story arc. She had uh 5 books and was able to resolve one of her core questions, which is what happened to her mother. Her mother basically abandoned her with her grandparents when she was 10, and she never knew what happened to her. So I was able to have that overarching story. I would love to write about Max. She's one of my favorite characters, but I just don't see that happening, at least in the near future. As far as Lucy, I put Lucy on hiatus after book 17 because I didn't have any fresh ideas for her. I didn't want to rehash ideas. I didn't really know what direction I wanted to go. And like I said at the very beginning, my most important thing is to make sure that I satisfy my readers because your time is valuable and that I'm happy with what I'm writing. So I had to put her on a hiatus until I could come up with good ideas. I kind of have a very loose idea on how to reboot her series, but right now I don't have the time to do it because I have other commitments. So with Max, probably no more books. With Lucy, I do hope to write more books in the future, but it will probably be a couple of years.
Follow-up question from Vicky. Can you share what you're currently working on? So you did mention that the next book that's being published this summer is going to be more of a light mystery. I imagine if it's being published this summer, you probably wrote it 6 months ago at least, or something like that. Not sure exactly what the lead time is there, but what are you writing currently? Can you disclose that to us?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So yes, you're right. Beach Reads and Deadly Deeds. That's pretty much that's done I'm actually doing some last minute revisions just to clean it up. And then I have the next Angel Heart book comes out in September. It's called Don't Say a Word. But the book I'm writing now is the seventh Quinn and Costa book. It's the book that comes out after See How They Hide. I don't have a title for it. I'm calling it Game Over. I'm hoping my publisher will keep the title, but I don't know that they will. I have written the first couple of chapters already. I absolutely love it. It's set in Florida and Georgia, and Matt and Kara go undercover to catch a killer who targets honeymooning couples. In
Ooh.
the first chapter, they arrest him, they wrap him up with a nice little bow and hand him over to the local law enforcement, and then go about their take like a weekend together because they are romantically involved. Little do they know he had a partner, and that's actually what's starting the story. So I had so much fun coming up with this idea, and so I already am at the part where they um I'm not giving any spoilers away because clearly this all happens in the first two chapters. So that's what I'm working on now. And so I can't wait to get back to it. As soon as I'm done with my revisions, I get to get back to that book.
Yeah, well, you have me hooked already for sure. And I did read your website, so I think I might know how you're going to answer this question. But Vicky wants to know, who was your favorite character to write about? Do you have a favorite protagonist or a favorite character in general?
Yeah, that's really hard. I have five kids. I do not have a favorite kid. I always say my favorite kid is the one when I'm busy, it's the one that's not bothering me at the time, or it's the one that's doing something for me, like doing the dishes. Oh, you're not my favorite child. You did the dishes without being asked. That's so wonderful. With characters, I think there's I like them for different reasons. I love Lucy because she's such a long running character for me that I feel like she's practically a sister. I know her so well. Um, Maxine Revere was so much fun because she was so different than all my other characters. She was very confident, she was bold, she was beautiful, she was rich, she had like a whole bunch of things going for her, but she was also very stubborn and judgmental, which was a lot of fun to write, surprisingly. But I think sometimes my favorite characters are the ones that are the secondary characters. They're the ones that are only going to pop up in one book, and they resonate with me for different reasons. Peter, in a book called Stalked, it was the fifth Lucy book. I really felt for him. His sister had been killed when he was a little boy, and part of the story is about what happened in his life after she died. Um, Riley Pierce in See How They Hide really resonated with me once I got into her head and how she grew up and how she handled the traumas in her life. I really, really liked her. Um, in Seven Girls Gone, one of my favorite characters there was the grandmother, Tony Hebert. And she's just a secondary character, but she was so much fun. And I loved how she interacted with Kara. I think when I look at my characters, it's really just a matter of how they work with my team. I mean, yes, I love everybody that I write about, but sometimes it's those secondary characters that really pop for me.
So you had said you're a pantser and not a plotter. Vicky asks, how do you decide who your villain is going to be? And Vicky also wants to know, do you ever base any of your villains or any of your other characters off of people you know in real life?
Um, Sometimes I know who the villain is, and I don't like to know who the villain is because I find myself writing towards a resolution as opposed to letting the story unfold organically. But sometimes just the story itself, I know who the villain is. Like I know in the one I'm writing now who the villain is because I have to. I mean, otherwise it wouldn't work. Um, but that's going to be kind of fun because it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game. And so the readers are going to know too. And I think it's going to work. Hopefully, knock on wood. My editor will be the final judge of that. As far as what was the second part of the question? Missed it.
Yeah, it was. Do you base any of your characters and your villains on people you know in real life?
Oh, no. And if I did, it would be just like little traits of characters. I make them all up as uh they're all in my head. There has been a few things where I've heard stories and I've kind of there was a book I wrote a long time ago called Tempting Evil, and one of my my closest friends, she had a friend of hers who did some of the things that the mother of the killer did to him. And it was I didn't base the mother on her, but some of the her actions I did use because it was just heartbreaking. And I wouldn't say all of them, and obviously I did use her as the character, but it was just one of those heartbreaking situations of a single mom and things that she had done. So I'll use little tidbits and stuff, but I don't use real people.
Allison, how would you define a good twist? Because I like books with unexpected, unpredictable twists. I don't like to see the twist coming, but I'm also a hypocrite, Allison, because at the end of the book, when there's a resolution, I do like to be able to look back and see some clues, you know? So I guess I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. But like, what is a good twist to you? Could you define what a good twist is?
I think, well, you bring up a really good point. You don't want to shock the reader and say, "Hey, wait a minute. How did they figure this out?" You want to have it where the reader can um look back and say, "Oh, I missed that," or "Oh, I saw that. That was so cool." So a good twist is something that you may not see coming, but doesn't come out of left field.
Mm.
If that makes any sense. And I
Yeah.
will say, I just read a book that he doesn't need any recommendations, but I'll just recommend it anyway. The Big Empty by Robert Grace. I
Yeah.
just finished this book. It comes out next week. I was lucky enough to get an early copy. He did that, whereas everything is in there to figure out what the mystery is. And I figured out part of it, but I didn't figure out all of it. And it was like, oh, that makes sense. And then when it all came together, it was like, that is so cool. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it, but that's really once you get to the end and then you go, yep, it was all there. And it was absolutely amazing. So it's like I got part of it, but until he actually did the final reveal, I didn't get all of it. So it was, and I don't want to give it away because it is really, really a great book. Um, he deserves being number one New York Times bestselling author because I love all of his books. But so that's really what I think of as a twist. You never want to like fool your readers, and this is one reason I have a problem with some books, not all books. I don't like the unreliable narrators where a reader is reading something and you don't really know what, what's going on and if you can trust them and all that. I'm not into those stories, other than Agatha Christie did it really, really well. Because I trust my readers to just follow along. I don't want to try to deceive them.
Deidre wants to know, with so many different characters and so many different books, how do you keep all your characters straight in your head and then keep developing them for the next book in the series?
Well, I because my series are very distinct, I it's really easy to go back and forth between them because they have different feeling, even though they're all mystery suspense. But I do have what I call here, it's my little, I keep one little notebook for every book I write. And so I keep it next to my desk and I write down everything that's important. So my characters, um, ideas like, oh, I got to remember to do this, and I'll write it down so that I kind of have a book Bible. They're only notes that I will understand. If anybody looked at it, they would say you're kind of half crazy because this doesn't make any sense, but it makes sense to me because and so that kind of keeps me on track. And then I'll review it before I write the next book to make sure, okay, I had this character, we got it, and this idea, and this is what I said, and this is what the name of their dog is, whatever it happens to be, then I just have it there. So each book gets one of those little notebooks, and it keeps me on track.
Amanda wants to know: are there any additional books that you've written that you've held in reserve that you haven't published yet?
Yes, the first four books that I wrote will never see the light of day. One exception. The fourth book I wrote is completely a different genre. It's actually light science fiction.
Wow.
I pitched it as aliases. This is very old time because none of the show isn't around anymore. But if the show Alias had a character named Sydney Bristow, so
Yes.
Alias is Sydney Bristow meets JD Robb's Eve Dallas. It's basically a spy thriller that takes place in the future, and I absolutely love this book. What happened is I finished that book. It was the fourth book I wrote, and I loved it. And I sent it out to a couple of agents. Then I finished my fifth book, which was a romantic suspense, and I sent that out to agents. I got bites on the romantic suspense, and that's the book I sold. 6 months after I sold that book, I got a letter from an agent who wanted to read my futuristic spy thriller. And I'd already sold, so I couldn't go with another agent. So I had to say sorry. Um, but I was excited. So I sent it to my agent and said, hey, I had another query about this. Maybe you want to read it. And she didn't like it. Now that she's not my agent now. I have a new agent. Well, not really new. I've had him for 15 years. Someday I would love to rewrite that book and publish it. But because it is so completely different, I don't know if I'll be able to.
I was a Jack Bristow fan from the Alias show.
I love that
So
show.
there you go. Vicky asks, if someone is just starting to read your books, where do you recommend they start? With a standalone or with a series? And if so, which series?
um, I think the first book in the Quinn and Costa series, it's called The Third to Die. I think it's discounted on ebook right now. That is a really good example of my voice. I think it's if you like that book, you'll probably like almost anything I write. If another good place to start is the first Angel Heart book, which is called You'll Never Find Me. One, because there's only one book in that series, so it's a good place to start because you never don't have to like catch up. Um, but that also, I love those characters. It's also in first person. If you don't want to invest time in a series, I only have one standalone out right now. It's called North of Nowhere, and that's my mom's favorite book. So my mom is 79, but she loves that book. I don't know why. She just said she did. And she's very honest with me. She's read all my books. So she absolutely loved the book. In fact, she just said she reread it last month. So
And Allison, I know this might be tough to do, but if you had to name a few authors who maybe are RITA likes that are kind of similar to you, like sort of in what vein do you write if you had to compare yourself to authors in your genre?
well, I would love to be compared to Lisa Gardner because she is one of my favorite authors. And she does write the really kind of dark, twisty suspense, character driven suspense books that I love. Um, so her, I would probably say um, maybe a little bit of Catherine Coulter. Um, her, especially like her older FBI books that tend to be very fast paced and twisty. Um, it's really hard because a lot of the like I love Robert Crace and I love Greg Hurwitz, but I don't write like them. So it's really hard to kind of say. But I would probably say that if you like Tammy Hogue, um, is another one. She writes kind of the dark, twisty suspense. And but in terms of like the mystery element, yeah, I would probably say Lisa Gardner is probably the closest.
And
Tammy Hogue,
Allison,
Lisa Gardner, maybe.
Yeah, and Catherine Coulter, sure. So we're gonna get you out of here with this question, I think. So our library,
Okay.
lots of libraries have writing groups. Might have a couple of aspiring writers on the call right now. What advice would you give to someone who is trying to break into the writing industry?
Well, a couple of things. First, you have to find the time to write. That's the most important thing. Second, learn how to self-edit because you want to have your book to be as clean as it possibly can. Sometimes finding a critique group works great, which is a group of 2 or 3 other writers, all about the same level, where you can all help each other become better writers. Um, there's a lot of online classes, some that are free, some that are inexpensive, some that are expensive. You could pick and choose, but there's a lot of free things out there, free resources to kind of say, you know what, I'm struggling with dialogue. I want to take a class about dialogue. You might pay $25, but you'll learn from somebody who's an expert on dialogue. But mostly it's practice. Write and rewrite and recognize that almost every author out there has did not sell their first book. So don't give up. If you write a book and it's rejected, write another book and get it out there. Stephen King's book on writing, which is one I recommend to aspiring writers, he had hundreds of rejections before he sold Carrie. Hundreds and hundreds of rejections. And that's okay because there's every book you write is going to be better than the last. And that's what you're always striving to do. And if you love to write, just keep writing and keep working to improve your craft. When you're ready, um, I a lot of people, self-publish these days, which is fine, but don't just put anything out there. You need to have it professionally edited. There's too much stuff out that has had no formal editing, and you can tell. And it's discouraging to readers when they pick something up and it's not a well-written book. Might be a great story. So that would be the other thing is either find an agent and go ahead and just keep writing with the goal to find an agent and to get published. Or if you go to self-publishing, make sure that you hire an outside editor to get the book as good as and strong as it can be.
And there's been some compliments in the chat. He says, thanks so much. A very interesting and informative program. It was so good to get to know Allison a little better. Allison, do you have any last words for the audience as we start to wrap things up?
No, I thank you so much for coming. And I'm sorry, my room all of a sudden got dark as soon as the sun went down. It's like, but a little too think. I put up all my snow villages this year, which means I took out the lamps that were in my office to put up my snow villages. And snow villages don't give as much light as my lamps. And I didn't realize it because this is the only evening Zoom I have done.
That's okay. Some of your books are a little dark, so it made sense that the room got a little dark as we went. Jerry says thank you. Vicky says she loved this chat. So folks, look for an email from me tomorrow with a link to this YouTube recording, as well as information about some other upcoming virtual author visits that might be of interest. Allison, we have Lisa Gardner coming in March. Okay, so I'll make sure to
Awesome.
send you the link to that one. Also, there'll be a link to Wellesley Books where you can buy a copy of Allison's new book. Very much looking forward to reading it. See How They Hide, the latest in the Quinn and Costa FBI series. So folks, make sure to take that 60-second feedback survey when you exit the Zoom, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their evening. Thanks again, Allison.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, bye-bye.